Great. So I think we'll get started now. We'll let people continue to join. But welcome everybody. Welcome to Education Support's first Insta Live. So no pressure at all. But we're really happy to see you here. I'm Faye McGuinness. I'm the Director of Programmes here at Education Support. And as our Instagram profile says, we're the only UK charity dedicated to supporting everybody that works in the education sector. As you can imagine, it's that time of night when there is noise coming from every direction. So please do bear with us, and apologies in advance if you hear any of that noise in the background, but we're all used to this way of working now. So before I introduce our wonderful guest, I'm just going to remind you today of the theme of this Insta Live. So the theme is around stress. And why have we chosen that theme? Well, we know that teachers have been working incredibly hard to support and educate the young people in our schools and communities. And we know that the pandemic has brought many opportunities to think about the way that education works, but it's also provided a lot of challenges for those that are working in the education sector. And what do we know around stress and those working in education? Well, we ran a survey in March this year with YouGov. And what it told us is that 82% of teachers describe themselves as feeling stressed. And also that 46% of teachers said that pressures on their mental health and well-being have caused them to consider leaving the profession in this academic year. And this really chimes with what we learn in our Teacher Wellbeing Index, which is something that we run every year. And we published those results at the end of last year, and what we found is that around 84% of teachers describe themselves as stressed or very stressed at that time. And also what we're seeing is an increase in those who have experienced symptoms associated with poor mental health. So I think it's a really important topic, and it's really important that we talk about the drivers of stress within the education sector, but also hints and tips around how people can support their own mental health and well-being. So I just want to introduce, as I say, our wonderful guest, Victoria Hewitt, who is also known as Mrs Humanities. So Victoria, please introduce yourself, introduce what you do, and your sort of passion for this area around mental health and well-being.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me as your first guest for the live Instagram approach. So yeah, I'm Victoria Hewitt. I am a geography teacher, subject leader and professional tutor. But I'm also a big advocate for positive mental health and well-being within the education sector. I went through a breakdown myself and came out the other side, and I absolutely adore teaching now. But I know it can be a difficult profession to work within. There's so many different stresses, and I just really want to help other people to, find the love that I have for teaching as well.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for sharing your own personal experience. I think those stories are really important for other people to hear, and to hear about those personal experiences. So I've got some questions, and we'll just have kind of a nice chat around some of these. But really, firstly, we know that the challenges faced by schools during the pandemic have been widely reported. We've read the papers, we've watched the news, we've heard a lot around that. But from your experience, what does that actually mean for the day-to-day working lives of teachers and school staff?
It's been a complete culture change within the school, particularly the school that I work at. There's just constant changes. There's constant, new information coming in from government, and there's never any lead-in time with that from the government's perspective. It'll be a nationwide announcement, and then schools will find out. Whereas, if we had time to plan and prepare, we wouldn't be thrown in at the deep end, essentially, with all these different changes. So on the ground, it's been quite stressful having to, keep up with the incoming information, then kind of adapt to that information, whilst also trying to maintain the everyday things that you do in the classroom. So, the actual teaching, which is completely different now, switching to remote teaching or blended teaching. But then there's also, you've still got the marking and the feedback to provide. You've got assessment, you've got, working with colleagues, and everything is just so different at the moment. And as a result, it is quite stressful. It's far more stressful than it's ever been. And I'm seeing teachers that have been quite calm, and they're really resilient, and they're actually getting quite stressed and anxious about going to work and the experiences that we might be facing.
Yeah, and I think, we talk about pressure, and some pressure being good for some people. It can be a motivator, it can, make people feel like they're really connected. But actually, when that pressure turns to stress, and that is stress that is ongoing and long term, that can have a really detrimental impact on people's mental health and well-being. And I think, as you say, all of the things that you've had to deal with on top of your day jobs, you can absolutely understand that. And I think, one of the points that you made there is around announcements being made nationally and then you kind of finding out about them. And we know that autonomy is such an important driver for good mental health. So how has that played out in terms of feeling like you maybe not had your hands on those decisions, and kind of that lack of autonomy to make some of those decisions?
Well, around this time last year, I personally found it incredibly stressful, not knowing when we were going to be back, how long we had to plan for. And as a result, I did end up reaching out to Ed Support again, because I just couldn't deal with the pressure and the ongoing stress over the few months that we were in the first lockdown. And that again is because of that autonomy. I just didn't have any control over what was going on, and therefore, that increased the anxiety and the stress levels. Thankfully, this time my school has been fantastic, and they've been so supportive at supporting staff and students throughout this last lockdown. And it meant that we had a lot more autonomy in terms of approaching remote learning. We knew how long we were doing it for, so we could actually plan well for it. And as a result, we all felt far more confident in delivering really good online learning, as opposed to maybe the first time around.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's that circle of control, isn't it? What can we control? What can we influence? And what have we got no control over? And I think amidst the global pandemic, we feel like there's so much we have no control over. But to be able to sit comfortably with that can feel quite difficult. But we often talk about that exercise being a good exercise to use in teams and as individuals to identify those things. What do you feel like the impact of a stressed out teacher can be on a pupil or other colleagues within the school?
Oh gosh. Where to start with that one? So with the students, I think when teachers are stressed, the students just naturally then start to become quite stressed themselves. They recognize the stress within adults in their, whether it's at home or within school, within their local community, and as a result, they do pick up on that. They then start exhibiting those behaviours as well. And then in terms of teaching staff and colleagues trying to work together, everyone's working to the best of their ability, but sometimes relationships can become a bit fraught when you haven't got that ability to just go and pop into the classroom down the corridor and have that quick chat, and instead you're just back and forth with lots of emails, and then the original message gets lost, and before you know it, both ends are stressed and they don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, and relationships with our colleagues are such an important driver, aren't they, for us feeling well at work and feeling connected and happy. And connection is so important, and you lose that connection through email in a way that if you're in a room together and you're able to have that conversation, it's a completely different feeling, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Than being behind a laptop. And just coming back to your point around kind of sort of pupils and the kind of impact on the pupils and the young people, we know that the pandemic is going to have a significant impact on many children and young people, and just kind of thinking about the kind of work that you do and other colleagues around sort of taking on some of that emotional burden and that content that you're dealing with children and young people. Has there been anything that you've done within your school to make sure that you have somewhere to talk to about some of that emotional content?
Within our school, so our pastoral support team are fantastic, and the students know that they can go and speak to those members of staff, or any member of staff, to be honest, but they know that those particular members of staff are there. And we've actually just before Christmas, our school employed a wellbeing kind of coordinator who's overseeing wellbeing within the whole school, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And it'd be great if more schools had somebody that was looking after the well-being of staff, students, and everyone within the school community, really, if funding allows for it. But one thing I have seen is actually the other way around. So rather than students being more stressed and more anxious and that, is I've actually seen students build relationships with each other, and they're actually talking more about how they're feeling. And you know, there used to be, I guess, a bit of a stigma around saying that you didn't feel, you know, quite right, or you were feeling stressed and anxious and worried, whereas now I'm finding that the students are far more open to saying, look, I'm not feeling okay, can I talk, or you know, can I just go and spend a minute outside just to cool down, and I'll come back in when I'm ready. So I have noticed that there's been that shift in the students as well, in that recognition of how they're doing and their stress and anxiety levels.
That's great. And, you know, I think if we can use a pandemic as a catalyst to break down the stigma around mental health and wellbeing, we know that when it comes to staff mental health and wellbeing within education, there is still a stigma. Our index report shows us that. So if we can use this as a catalyst to start those conversations, and that kind of collective, we've all been through something really difficult, enables us to maybe feel more comfortable about having that conversation, but we need to use it as a catalyst for sure. So what would you personally like to see in place in schools to help teachers and education staff with stress? What would be the things that you think need to be implemented?
I think, first of all, there needs to be that recognition that, you know, mental health and well-being go hand in hand. And we need to encourage teachers and educators to put themselves first, essentially, so that actually they can be the best they can be for their students. Like, I really struggle with systems where there's a lot of scrutiny and accountability, because it just means that people are working towards the wrong thing. So I'd love to see more of the kind of collaboration and sharing and you know, exploring good practice, rather than the scrutiny that a lot of schools still experience with things like book looks, regular lesson observations. And I think that would be one of the biggest influences of kind of improving well-being of staff and students as well, actually, because, you know, if the staff are calmer and feeling better within themselves, that then automatically kind of influences the students and how they behave and respond as well. And then the other thing is actually just making sure that there's that facility for people to be able to just talk, without thinking that actually this is going to get back to my senior leader or my line manager. And, you know, people need to have that confidentiality, that it is okay to talk about how you're doing and your struggles and your stresses, and there won't be any judgment with it. Yeah.
Rebecca's saying that she absolutely agrees. Really, really good points. And I think in our wellbeing index, what we saw is that less than 10% of those working in education have access to supervision as a space to talk about some of these issues. So we would strongly advocate that actually that is something that is provided to everybody working in education. It's absolutely important to have that space to talk. And I guess, you know, when we think about the kind of levels of support, so as individuals, we can all take responsibility for looking after our own mental health and well-being. You have the role of schools as employers and creating the cultures and the conditions for positive mental health. And then, like you say, you have the decisions that are made at that kind of policy government level that could be a real driver as well. So just thinking about at the individual level, has there been things that you've seen individuals in your school do to kind of manage their stress or to support each other, and the sort of things that you might have implemented as an individual?
Yeah, absolutely. So on an individual level, one of the things I've really learned to do is regularly check in with myself. And when I can feel my heart kind of starting to race, just kind of taking a moment and just going, right, what is going on in my head? What's making me feel like this? And just having that check-in moment, right, okay, this is what's stressing me out. Have I got any control over it? Yes. Okay, let's go and do this. No, I haven't. Okay, what can I do then to kind of reduce the stress associated with that? And literally, sometimes it might be in the middle of a lesson and suddenly I'm just like slight panic, and just in my head, just very quickly, 30 seconds. And then before I know it, I'm like back to, okay, I can do this. I can carry on. And I just kind of recognize now that my emotions and my, my stress levels, they do vary, but I do have some control over that and what I do as a result. I'm always encouraging others to just spend that moment in the morning when you're in the shower or driving to work, just to go, okay, how am I feeling today? What might I need to do in order to then get back to myself? And then encouraging people to do things like, go and rest. If you need a night off from working, take that night off, because otherwise you just end up feeling more tired, and eventually, you can reach burnout. Or, if you just feel like you need that human connection, go and spend time with people that you enjoy spending time with, maybe virtually now, but and actually I think that's one good thing about this pandemic, is that it's made us keep in touch in completely different ways. And actually, I don't know about other people, but I'm finding that I talk to my mum a lot more now, and my dad, whereas maybe I used to talk to them once a week. Now I talk to them pretty much like every day when I'm out for a stroll or something. And then the other thing I think is just having that time for the things that you enjoy, the recreation. I personally, I've taken up running in the last couple of years, and I've been taking part in Strides Against Stress for Ed Support, and absolutely been loving that. And I'm currently training for the virtual London Marathon as well.
Rather you than me.
So yeah, for me, that's my recreational activity, along with letter writing and journaling, and that's been really helpful. And when I talk to early career teachers, I'm like, right, what are you doing this weekend to make sure that you're not spending the entire time working, because you do not need to. What can we do to reduce that workload a little bit so that you have got time to invest in yourself, essentially?
Yeah, and I think they're brilliant tips. And I think actually that last point that you made around newly qualified teachers, we know that a third of newly qualified teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years. So, is there anything that you think we could be doing, at that early stage of someone's career, to really make sure that they're putting things in place to look after themselves and to prioritise their own mental health and well-being?
I personally think it's very much a school level approach that's needed there, and that's in terms of the the policies in place, expectations for marking and feedback, expectations for behaviour, and whether teachers have to set detentions and do them with the students themselves, or whether it's more centralised, and all of those things can have a big influence on a teacher's time. When I used to set detentions, rather than having a lunch break, I'd be sat with students helping them to catch up with the work that they didn't do in the lesson, and just those little things then mean that you're not looking after yourself. So yeah, I really think it's a top-down approach when it comes to early career teachers that is needed.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, isn't it? Because it's all about setting the culture and the conditions and the permission actually to look after yourself, and I think we know that that's such an important part of people when they start an organisation or they start in a school, that the expectation that is set is so important from the first moment, really. And just coming back to your point around individuals, I think some really useful tips there. And I think that we talk a lot about worry time, and when I first heard about this, I was like, what is this concept? But actually I've been talking about it quite a lot, and it really resonates with people. But just to share with people that are watching, there are always going to be things that we're going to be worried about, and particularly the things that we're not in control of. They can take a lot of our brain space, and we ruminate a lot. So the idea is that you can allocate time to worry, and that's your worry time. And you can make a cup of tea, you can get out your journal, you can sit down. It might be that you allocate half an hour every day, or you might allocate 2 hours a week, but that's your time to worry, and allow yourself to worry. Try and practice not trying to find solutions if you have no control over it, and then put those worries away. And you may revisit them every day because it might still be on your mind, but it means that your whole day is not consumed by that thing. And we know that those kind of worries and rumination can really lead to people feeling stressed. So that was just one of the tips that I wanted to share. But when I heard, I was like, oh, I never thought about that.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, so really, really interesting. So are there any kind of hints and tips that you would like to share from the perspective of what you think line managers need to think about when supporting staff around stress?
Yeah, so one would probably be that recognition that just because you're okay with it doesn't mean that everyone else is. Sometimes, you know, the expectations that we place on others can be so high that actually we don't then look at what could be causing them challenges or, you know, stress and anxiety. So just recognizing that what works for you doesn't necessarily work for somebody else, and being flexible and adaptable with what we expect from those that we work with. Yeah. And then I think that leads into what you said earlier about the permission and giving yourself the permission then, right, my line manager says it's okay, I say it's okay, I can, you know, stop and take a break.
Yeah, definitely. There's a great tool that people can use called the Wellbeing Action Plan. You can download it from Mind Charity website, and really it's just a tool for people to start to think about what are the things that I need to do to keep myself well, what signs might I be exhibiting if I'm starting to feel stressed, how would I want to be approached. And it's a great tool for line managers and their direct line reports to use to have a conversation. Very, very simple tool to use. Rebecca's saying that self-care is super important. You can't pour from an empty cup. Plus fabulous role modeling to the children who will also be adults one day. Absolutely correct, Rebecca. You know, the role modeling piece is really, really important for our colleagues and for the children and young people that we're supporting. Fab. So I'm conscious that we're coming to time, but I just wanted to ask if there's any kind of last comments or hints or tips that you wanted to share with us today that you feel like we need to cover off.
I think my top tip would be, you know, look after yourself, essentially. There's only one of you and you can't do everything. You're only human. So take care of yourself, and then everything else will just kind of fall into place.
Yeah, that's a lovely, lovely way to finish up there. So I just wanted to remind everybody who's watching about our helpline number. It's a free, confidential 24-hour helpline that could be accessed by anybody working in education. The number is 08000 562 561. And please do visit our education support website. We have lots of information and self-care hints and tips and lots of videos and resources on there as well. As I say, this is our first Insta Live, but we hope to do many more in the future. So thank you so much for taking the time to join today. And please, you know, feel free to contact us on Twitter and let us know what types of subjects you would like us to cover, or on Instagram, what you would like us to cover in the future. But wishing you all a lovely evening. Thank you.